They said the fog in Calmareth Hollow never truly lifted. It only lowered itself, patient as sleep, clinging to the bone-colored trees like some old cloth placed over a face. By the time she arrived, the sun was only a suggestion behind a ceiling of pewter sky. The air tasted of stone and rain-soaked wood, and the silence pressed so tightly against her ears that it felt like a presence rather than an absence. Her name was Elara Calderon, but the locals would not say it out loud. She was the last of her bloodline, or so the letter claimed. Brittle paper, sealed with red wax, and the old crest no one used anymore. It had been buried under decades of legal dust, resurrected only because no one else could be found. She hadn't known the family beyond whispers and obituaries, but something in her, some slow ache of longing or guilt, had compelled her to return. The carriage stopped just at the split of the road. The driver did not speak. He simply nodded once toward the veiled shape in the distance, then turned the horses without another word. No one ever drove past the Blackthorn Gate. The hollow, as the village knew it, belonged to the house. Elara approached on foot. The rusted gates creaked open, not with resistance, but with something closer to welcome. Ivy strangled the outer walls. The ground was soft with moss, and the path had sunken in on itself like it had been exhaling for years. The Calderon estate rose in silence, a silhouette of wet stone, splintered towers, and broken crosses worn smooth by decades of quiet. It looked less like a home and more like a cathedral abandoned mid-prayer. No wind stirred, but still the trees bowed inward. The house didn't look ruined. It looked paused. She stood before the main doors. Twin slabs of black oak, each carved with the hourglass sigil she remembered faintly from childhood dreams. The left one bore a deep, recent scar down its center. Her hand hovered over the iron handle, trembling slightly from the cold. She had not eaten since yesterday, and the hunger now felt strangely ancestral. Not hers exactly, but remembered through blood. Then the door opened. Not all the way, not with force. Just enough to admit her, as if something inside had recognized her touch before she even made it. Inside, the air was still and heavy, like an old breath held too long. The entry hall stretched into darkness, though candlelight flickered faintly along the left corridor. Dust hung in the beams like frozen smoke. The wood beneath her feet did not creak. That disturbed her more than she expected. Homes should age with sound, but the Calderon house had preserved itself in silence, not as a kindness, but as a vow. Portraits lined the walls, unsmiling men and pale women, all painted with hands clasped tightly around unseen objects. None bore plaques, yet the eyes all shared something terribly familiar. It was not likeness, but resignation. The first room she entered was the parlor. Cold velvet furniture, a hearth filled with blackened soot, untouched for at least a generation. A clock on the mantel ticked softly, though it had no hands. There was no smell of rot, no infestation. Just candle wax, mildew, and wet ash. Her suitcase remained untouched in the doorway, as if she no longer needed it. And then a sound, not sharp, not loud, a soft humming just at the edge of hearing, like a lullaby made of breath. It came from the second floor. She froze. It stopped. When she looked up the grand staircase, there was nothing, just the portrait at the landing. A woman in white, veiled, her fingers stained faintly red. She did not go upstairs, not yet. Instead, she found the old study. It bore the faintest warmth. A fireplace newly cleaned, a chair turned slightly toward the window as if someone had only just left. On the desk, a ledger. Yellowed, damp at the edges, blank. But on the windowsill sat a single item, a rusted key with a satin ribbon tied around it. The ribbon was embroidered faintly with the word hour. It made no sense, yet it felt like a gift or a warning. She pocketed the key without thinking. Outside, the fog had begun to rise again, curling up the steps like a second staircase. She stayed in the study until the shadows grew too long to measure. When she stepped into the hall again, the left corridor had changed. There was a door at the end that had not been there before. No sound, no shift in air. Just a new door, as if the house had exhaled it into existence. It was locked, of course, but the ribboned key slid in like it had been waiting. Inside, a nursery, pale green walls, a cradle, dustless, empty, a child's rocking horse, gently tilted, and something else. A broken medallion in the center of the rug, one half of the Calderon crest. She reached for it, and the candle behind her extinguished. Not from wind, there was no wind. The room darkened just enough for her to feel blind. The walls closed inward subtly, like lungs deflating. The house, it seemed, was listening, and in that moment a memory surged from nowhere. A dream she had as a child of being buried in a white gown while her mother sang to the dirt. She dropped the medallion, stepped back, closed the door. It clicked shut with finality. When she returned to the parlor, the fireplace had lit itself. The portrait on the landing was now blank. Some homes do not forget. They only wait to be remembered. Tomorrow she would explore further, but tonight she would sit by the fire, eyes open, listening to the silence between the walls. It was no longer empty, it was aware, and in some subtle, terrifying way, it was pleased. The morning came slowly, not with light, but with a thinning of the fog. Ilara Calderon awoke to a house that felt disoriented by daylight. The walls had absorbed the night like a sponge, and now exhaled a dampness that clung to her skin and tongue. The hearth embers still glowed in the study. Her neck ached from sleeping upright in the velvet chair. She had no memory of dozing off, only of staring into the fire and hearing something soft breathe from behind the chimney stones. She walked to the front window. The trees were still. No birds sang, no insects stirred. The garden, tangled and overgrown, had not welcomed the sun. It merely endured it. Later that morning, she made her way into town on foot. The village was little more than a cluster of slate roofs and steeples, softened by time and thin smoke curling from the chimneys. The locals did not approach her, they only observed. One woman, hunched over a cart of onions, made the sign of the cross when Ilara passed. At the edge of the square, she found a faded shop, Fallow's Provisions. The bell above the door did not ring when she entered. It had been stuffed with cotton. Behind the counter stood a man in his 70s, face pale and lined like the trunk of a birch tree. He did not ask for her name. He only studied her face and then quietly said, "You shouldn't have stayed the night." Ilara paused. "Excuse me." "You came yesterday," he murmured, still not looking directly at her. "That's when they wake. First night's always the loudest, even when no one hears it." "I didn't hear anything," she replied, too quickly. He finally looked up. His eyes were clouded, not by cataracts, but by dread too old to name. "That's worse," he said. She left the shop with bread, matches, and a candle she didn't remember choosing. Outside, an old groundskeeper, or perhaps simply a drunk, sat slumped beneath the chapel wall, half asleep in a coat 2 sizes too big. As she passed, he muttered, "They always wrap the firstborn in white. Makes it easier to find him under moonlight." Ilara stopped. He chuckled softly, a sound more like coughing. "They told me once," he said, not looking up, "that the ground around that house is warm even in winter. Ain't natural. Ain't been since the old rites." "What rites?" she asked. His mouth curled into something like a grin, but his eyes stayed closed. "You'll see, or you won't." Back at the manor, the light was already fading. The clouds thickened before sunset, making the hour feel later than it was. She did not light the candle. Instead, she returned to the second floor. The left corridor was the same as before, until it wasn't. The cradle room remained sealed behind the ribboned keyhole. But now, just beside it, a mirror had been mounted where no mirror had been yesterday. Its surface was grayed, tarnished like breath frozen on glass. Her reflection shimmered unnaturally. A half-second delay, then perfect mimicry. She reached forward and wiped the glass. Behind her, in the reflection, a door opened at the end of the hall. She turned. Nothing. But the reflection still showed it open, black and yawning. She stepped toward the space. There was no door at the end of the hall, only an unlit sconce and wallpaper peeling back like flayed skin. Her fingers trembled as she reached to touch the wall. But then, something shifted. The air grew still. Not calm, still. Like the very concept of wind had been removed. And then, the lullaby returned. That same breathy hum just at the edge of her hearing, like something remembered from the womb. She followed it. Not out of curiosity, but because not following it felt somehow disloyal. The sound led her to the small room at the top of the staircase, the one that should have been a linen closet. Inside, there was no humming, only a white garment folded neatly on a child's chair. Lace, thin, hand-stitched, and resting on top, a lock of hair tied with black string. Beneath the chair, the floor was marked, not carved, but branded, as if heat had shaped the wood into an old symbol, a circle within a circle, bisected with a single downward-pointing blade. She did not touch the garment. She did not touch the hair. But when she turned to leave, she saw footprints, small, bare, leading toward the cradle room, and then stopping, as if whoever walked there had simply vanished. That night, the house was colder, the fire refused to catch. She sat in the study, wrapped in an old woolen throw that smelled faintly of myrrh and damp soil. The silence was no longer passive. It waited. At exactly 12:03 a.m. she awoke, though she could not remember falling asleep. A ticking filled the house. Not from clocks, from the walls. Tick, 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 like 100 tiny bones tapping behind plaster. She rose, slowly. Her feet felt heavier than before, as though the rugs had become soaked. The mirror in the upstairs hall was gone. In its place, a portrait, not painted, photographic, of her, standing beside the cradle, wearing the white garment, eyes closed, mouth stitched. She backed away, nearly slipping on the rug, and realized it was damp, as if someone had been buried beneath it. She did not sleep again that night. Instead, she sat in the front room, candle lit, staring at the front door. It remained closed, but sometime after 3 a.m., she heard something behind it. Not scratching, not knocking, digging, soft, rhythmic, like a spoon through wet earth. And with it, a voice. Low, muffled, familiar. We buried the firstborn, to keep the others alive. By morning, the silence was gone, not replaced by sound, but by breath. The house was no longer still. It inhaled, it exhaled. It had welcomed her, and it would not let her leave. The third morning brought no sun, only a sky the color of lead, and a stillness so deep that even the trees no longer rustled. Ilara woke with her fingers curled into fists and the faint impression of soil under her fingernails, though she had not left the house. Her dreams, half remembered, were of a handless clock ticking backwards and a woman's voice humming her name beneath the floorboards. The house felt different now, not colder, but closer. Every hallway seemed to bend just slightly inward. The corners curved, the doorframes bowed. The light came not from the windows, but from some dull internal glow. as if the house itself had developed a pulse. She made tea, though the water had a metallic taste and the kettle whistled too low, like something struggling to breathe. By mid-morning, she wandered the upper floors again. The second story stretched longer now. She counted the doors. 9. Yesterday there had been 7, or perhaps 8. The math slipped in her mind like water through cloth. The final door at the end of the corridor, one she had not seen before, stood open just a crack. Its knob was black iron, the wood pale and warped with age, yet unrotted. It pulsed with cold when she approached. She reached for the handle and stopped. There was a sound, not inside the room, but beneath it. A kind of slow, deliberate shifting, like wet linen being turned in the earth. She pushed the door open. The hinges gave no resistance, no sound, only space, widening slowly. Inside was a small rectangular chamber with no windows. The walls were painted a dull, almost jaundiced cream. One oil lamp sat in the far corner, though it hadn't been lit in decades. A child's chair stood in the center of the room, facing the far wall, where a wooden crucifix hung upside down. On the floor, a blanket lay folded in the exact shape of a body. She did not step inside. The air was heavy, not with smell, but with pressure. It pushed against her chest, like being underwater. As she turned to leave, she noticed a second door, half-sized, narrow, set low into the wall behind her, like a cupboard or a child's passage. It was locked, but not with a keyhole, with a sliding latch from the outside. She could only wonder what had once lived behind it. Before she could think further, something in the corridor caught her attention. The light. It had changed, from the color of dust to the color of rust. She stepped out of the room and stopped. All 9 portraits along the hall had shifted. The figures were now facing away, every single one, turned toward the wall, heads bowed. Only one remained visible, a small boy seated at a table, eyes wide, lips sewn shut with black thread. She returned to the cradle room. It was locked, but the ribboned key she had taken, the one marked hour, now bore a new etching. Beneath. When she slid it into the cradle room's keyhole, it turned without resistance. Inside, the room had changed. The cradle was gone. The chair was gone. Now there was a square of pale dirt in the center of the room, as if the wooden floorboards had decayed inward and revealed a patch of bare earth. And in the center of that earth, the broken medallion. She had not left it there. It had been gone since the first night. Now it lay, centered, partially buried, its metal dulled like old bone. Something compelled her to kneel. She brushed away the soil. Beneath the medallion was a scrap of fabric, white cotton lace, too fine for modern make. It was damp, and it was warm. She stood, unsteady, and backed from the room. Before closing the door, she noticed something she had not seen before. Carved above the door frame, barely legible. Returned. In the attic, she discovered a chest. It bore no lock, only a sigil, the hourglass with no sand. Inside, folded garments, all identical. Small white robes, each stitched with a name. She unfolded one. Annalisa Calderon, 1879. Another. Tomlin Calderon, 1902. Each robe was stained at the hem with brown stiff-edged marks. Soil, blood, wax. The final garment had no name, only the symbol and a date. Midnight, awaiting. She did not take it. She could not. Her breath grew shallow. The air in the attic pulsed like lungs struggling beneath floorboards. She fled down the stair. That night, the cradle room remained open. She passed by it, eyes averted. But as the clock struck 12, the sound returning at last, she heard a new noise, a wooden creak, like something heavy rocking back and forth. She turned toward the cradle room, and inside, though no wind blew, the chair rocked. Once, twice, then still. On the seat, a new object, a hand mirror. Cracked, she picked it up. In the reflection, the room behind her was empty, but her shoulders were being held by hands that weren't there. She did not scream. She could not. She placed the mirror back in the chair, closed the door, locked it. Some rooms are not meant to open, some are not meant to close, but the house decides, and tonight it had shown her one. Tomorrow it may show another. On the morning of the fourth day, the fog never lifted, not once. Instead, it pressed against the windows like a wet cloth pinned to glass, refusing to recede even as the house brightened faintly with the passing of time. Ilara did not know what hour it was. Her watch had stopped ticking sometime in the night. The mantel clock was missing its hands entirely, and when she asked the grandfather clock in the foyer to speak, it stayed silent, as if ashamed of what it had once marked. She found herself drawn again to the chapel. It sat detached from the main house, connected by a narrow breezeway of stone arches and ivy-veiled columns. The church was built not in honor of faith, but memory, her family shrine dressed as a sanctuary. Even in youth, she recalled seeing a photo of it in a family album her mother kept hidden under a floorboard. A black and white image of a stone arch beneath which no one stood. The key she'd found in the nursery, the one wrapped in ribbon and inked with the word hour, now bore a second word, etched so faintly that it only revealed itself when kissed by candlelight. Crypt She entered the chapel just after dusk. The interior was darker than the rest of the house, not from shadow, but because the light itself refused to remain. Her candle burned steadily, but the flame did not glow beyond its immediate reach, like the air had been thickened with centuries of regret. The pews were miniature, child-sized. The stained glass had no saints, only moons in varying phases. The altar was unadorned, save for a rusted bowl and a book chained shut. Behind the altar, beneath a red velvet rug, she found a trap door. The key turned, and the air beneath sighed open. The crypt below was older than the chapel above it. Cut directly into the stone of the hill, it curved downward like a spiral carved into a throat. The walls were wet. Roots broke through the cracks, like veins seeking light, and along the far wall, set into the alcove of a broken shelf, she found a bundle of cloth bound in twine. A diary, wrapped in black linen and wax-sealed with the mark of the family. She hesitated before unbinding it, not out of fear, but out of reverence. It had waited too long to be torn open carelessly. Inside, brittle pages, handwritten with precise, elegant strokes. Ink faded but legible. The name on the first page, Isabel Calderon, March 1891. Ilara brought it upstairs. She did not read it in the chapel. That felt like sacrilege. She returned to the study, lit the fire, lit 3 candles, closed the curtains, and began. My name is Isabel. I write these words because I fear they will be erased if I do not. I have no sons, only my daughter, but still the ground watches her. They told me the firstborn are prepared from the womb, that their breath is already promised by the time they cry, that our line does not survive unless one of us is given. I asked who first made the pact. They would not say, only that the land must not hunger. My brother Daniel was taken at midnight. We dressed him in white. They sang the hymn backward. They said he would sleep where the moon could see him. He cried, not from fear, but from knowing. Ilara paused. Her hands were trembling. The ink on the page bled slightly where her sweat touched it. She read on. When I married, they gave me the medallion. told me not to lose it, not to wear it, only to place it on the cradle when the time came. The ground beneath the nursery was always warm, even in winter, even when the house froze. I asked my mother why we never buried the stillborns. She looked at me as if I had spoken her name backward. Not all firstborns cry. Some laugh. That's worse. The entries grew shorter after that, more erratic, ink scratched harder. Dates no longer followed sequence. Some pages were crossed out entirely. One passage, barely legible beneath lines of frantic scrawl, read, "They say if you listen closely, you can hear the heartbeat through the crib slats, but it's not the child's." Another, "When they buried Tomlin, the earth swallowed too quickly. No sound, no breath, just gone." The final entry was dated October 3rd, 1891, the night Isabel's own firstborn was due. "I have prepared the linen, the cradle, the prayer. I will not weep, I will not scream. I will bury her with my own hands if I must. I am Calderon. I am duty. I do not know what happens after midnight. I only know we never speak of them again. The land does not forgive. It only bargains. And tonight, it will collect." The last page was blank, except for a smudge of red in the corner. Not ink, not wax. Darker, wetter. Ilara closed the diary and placed it beside the fire. She could not bring herself to burn it, but neither could she let it rest beside her. Instead, she left it open on the floor beneath the mantel, as if offering it back to the silence that had kept it safe all these years. And for the first time, she said the name aloud, softly, as if to no one. "Isabel." The fire hissed, and behind her, somewhere deep in the walls, the sound of rocking. A chair, back and forth, back and forth. No footsteps, no doors, just the movement of something waiting. That night, she dreamed of soil, not being buried, but being grown from. Her arms were roots, her spine a vine curled into the hill. And in the dream, a child crawled from her mouth, wrapped in white, eyes already shut, smiling. The diary remained open all night. In the morning it was gone. She arrived under the name Mother Cora, but no one could say where she came from. In the registry kept at the chapel, a line was drawn in place of her birthplace. The priest had noted simply, "No town given," accent unclear, eyes pale, wears gloves. Ilara first heard the name while thumbing through a brittle stack of birth records found behind a false panel in the old servants' corridor. Each one had the same peculiar footnote scrawled beside the name of the delivering midwife, assisted by Mother Cora. No payment requested. But something else unnerved Ilara more. A column on the far right, written in red ink rather than black. It read, "Crying? Yes, no." No further explanation, no follow-up, just the binary. Each Calderon birth had been marked with it. In 1903, Mother Cora was summoned again. A Calderon girl, Eleanor, had gone into labor a month early. No one had seen her in public since midsummer. The pregnancy had never been announced. The letter sent to the midwife was brief and chilling. "The ground is warm again. The time has come. We need your hands." And so she came. No carriage, no horse. Just the sound of her boots in the gravel and the smell of copper and dried herbs that followed her into the house. They said she never spoke until spoken to, that her hands moved with such precision it felt like choreography, that she never held the child longer than was needed, and never looked it in the eyes. The townspeople never questioned it. The Calderons, after all, were old. Their rituals were older. And besides, the Calderons buried their dead privately. It was understood. Ilara unearthed the event from a long-forgotten letter tucked inside a hymnal in the chapel. Not a birth record, but a confession. Written by the priest at the time, Father Raymond. The letter had been sealed but never sent. It was addressed to the Archdiocese of Louisville. To whom it may concern, I write to you not out of blasphemous doubt, but out of spiritual necessity. The family of Calderon continues to practice rites that deviate severely from the sacrament of baptism, and I fear that what they call consecration is in fact an older, more malignant form of dedication. The midwife they employ, calling herself Mother Cora, is not of this town, nor of this diocese. Her presence is silent, her rituals unblessed. I watched as she drew a circle in ash around the birthing bed, whispered verses that did not name Christ, and carried with her a basin of black stone that never once reflected candlelight. Most disturbingly, the child born that night made no sound. Yet the family did not grieve. They wept, yes, but not from sorrow. It was ritual. The child was not swaddled, but wrapped in vines. Live vines, pulled from beneath the house, where the earth had already been turned. At midnight, they gathered by the chapel's north wall, where the firstborn graves lie flat and unmarked. No ceremony, no psalm, only a whispered phrase I dared not repeat until now. Let the soil inherit what the womb borrowed. I cannot say what I witnessed was legal or holy. I can only say it has happened before, and it will happen again, unless someone dares to speak of it. I pray this letter finds you. I pray it is not too late. Signed, Dr. Raymond Caldwell, March 2nd, 1903. The letter was never mailed. Its seal was intact, and across the bottom corner of the envelope, a familiar smudge of red. Not ink, not blood. Waxy, almost fungal in smell. Ilara began searching the grounds behind the chapel the next morning. The earth was soft there, strangely so, as if it had never fully settled. Kneeling down, she placed her hand against the dirt. Warm, still, and as her palm lingered, she felt it. A heartbeat, not constant, not regular, more like a twitch or the flutter of something disturbed. She left immediately, returned to the house. But sleep would not come that night. Instead, she dreamed of Cora, but not as an old woman. In the dream, she was young, black eyes, veil of hair soaked with sweat, a long red apron that reached the floor stitched with names. Cora stood above a cradle. In it, a child with no mouth. She raised a spoon of soil to its face. The child drank. Its eyes closed, and then Cora turned, not to Ilara, but to someone behind her. You still think this is about blood? It was always about roots. Ilara woke with mud under her fingernails, and the sound of singing from the nursery, not a lullaby, a chant, low, monotone, and in a language she had never heard. She rose and walked, barefoot, half asleep, toward the sound. The nursery door was ajar. Rocking echoed softly through the hall. The cradle was moving, but no one was near it, and in the faintest candlelight she saw it. A red thread, thin as a hair, tied from the cradle's handle to the wall, leading upward, into the ceiling, into the wood, into the roots. The next morning, she found the journal. Not Isabel's. A new one, bound in thick green leather. It had been left on the study table next to a small ceramic bowl filled with grave soil. No name on the cover. Inside, one phrase, written over and over again. The firstborn, remember. The firstborn, remember. The firstborn, remember. The final page was blank, but written faintly in pressed indentation, only visible when angled toward light, was a new phrase. Ilara traced her finger over it. You are not the first to look, but you may be the last to forget. At dusk, she walked back to the chapel. The breeze had returned. The vines around the archway seemed to pulse softly in the wind, like veins in a sleeping hand. She did not go inside. Not yet. Instead, she looked down. Beneath her feet, the path was no longer stone, it was bone. Tiny fragments, porous, white, stained with time. Some of them were still growing. In the journal's final pocket, beneath a false lining, she found a photograph. Old, faded, corners burned. It showed the family, perhaps 5 generations back. They stood in front of the chapel, unsmiling. 11 figures. In the back, barely visible, stood a woman in a red apron. Her hands were folded. Her face was blurred, but her eyes, they were looking at Alara. By 1921, the Calderon estate was no longer a house. It was a tomb with windows. No children played in the garden. No voices echoed off the balconies. The halls, once gilded with laughter and lantern light, now devoured sound. Visitors, if any dared, would find their ears ringing in the silence, as if the walls themselves were hungry for words. But of all the peculiar rules that governed the Calderon household, none was more sacred or more feared than this. The dinner bell must never ring after sundown. Alara first heard the rule whispered by the oldest caretaker on the grounds, a woman named Miriam, whose back was hunched not from age, years of crouching through servant corridors, not meant for standing. They say the bell calls the ones beneath, she murmured once, refusing to look toward the dining hall. Calls them by name, like the chapel used to. When Alara pressed further, Miriam grew agitated, clutching her shawl as if something might pull it from her shoulders. They don't like to be reminded. You eat before dark, and you don't ring for what you can't unring. That year, 1921, marked what the family ledger described as a quiet season. No weddings, no births, no funerals. But behind closed doors, servants whispered that the family had suffered something worse. A stillbirth. A wrong one. A child that would not stop crying, even beneath the soil. And that after it was buried, the dining bell began to ring on its own. Once, then again the next night. Always at the same hour. 9:17 p.m. Alara found the incident documented in a brittle, tea-stained journal marked simply K. A housekeeper named Katerina had written it, her hand trembling so violently in places that the ink tore through the page. They say it's wind. It isn't. There is no wind at that hour. I've walked the grounds. Still as stone. But the bell is never moved by hands. Mrs. Calderon told us it was a wiring issue, that old metals shift in heat, that we were too superstitious to understand copper. But I've touched the bell, I've watched it. It moves only when unseen, and now it tolls again. Every night. Once. And then the house goes colder. At first, the staff tried to disprove it. They dismantled the bell, removed the clapper, even tied it in place with old rosary beads. It still rang, 9:17 p.m., and not always loudly. Sometimes just a faint tap, like a fingernail on porcelain. But it echoed all the same, through floorboards, through locked trunks, through the eardrums of sleeping children who woke with mud on their pillows. Katerina left the estate the night the bell rang twice. It was December 13th, the feast of St. Lucy, a day once celebrated in the Calderon household with wreaths and sweetbread. But in 1921, no such feast was held. Instead, that night the servants gathered in the kitchen, trembling. The first chime had come, as always, at 9:17. But then, minutes later, another, 9:22 p.m., 5 minutes apart. 2 rings, as if the house had birthed twins. Katerina later wrote a single page, found folded into the hem of her apron long after she'd disappeared. The second ring is not a warning. It is an answer. The first ring opens the door. The second means someone has come through. Ilara followed this trail to the great dining hall, where the bell still hung, rusted but intact. A crimson cord dangled from its mouth like a tongue, and though no one had touched it in decades, the table beneath it was freshly laid. 12 plates, silverware gleaming. No dust. The candles were unlit, but half melted. The glasses were full, not with wine, but with black water. On the north wall, a painting hung, one she hadn't noticed before. It depicted a family seated at a feast, heads bowed in prayer. But where the faces should have been, the artist had left them blank, as if eroded by time. Only one face remained clear, a child seated at the far end, alone. Eyes closed, mouth stitched shut. Behind the child, standing in the shadows, was a woman in a red apron. Her hand rested on the bell cord. That night, Ilara sat in the dining hall, alone. She waited, not for food, but for sound, and at exactly 9:17, nothing. But 5 minutes later, 9:22, a breath of cold air moved through the hall. The candlesticks shivered, the tablecloth trembled, and behind her, without sound or motion, the bell had moved. Not rung, moved, turned slightly, just enough to face her. Ilara did not eat that night. She fasted until dawn, unsure if consuming anything would bind her to what now sat beside her, invisible but present. Later, she scoured the house records for more mentions of dinner bells. Only one surfaced, from the 1850s, a letter penned by a woman named Annalise Calderon. "My daughter, born in shadows, will not eat with us." She waits by the bell. She listens for the second chime. We have begun serving her plate last. It disappears each night, and the cradle is always cold. Ilara found the old servant tunnels behind the wine cellar, the ones that had once connected the kitchen to the nursery. She walked them, candle in hand. The walls bore finger marks, not of full hands, but the size of a child's. Scratched in lines, always 5 at a time, as if counting. On the final door, someone had carved, "Second bell equals second birth. Second birth, tola equals first to rise." The door opened with a groan. Beyond it, an empty pantry, except for one item. A high chair, crimson-stained, rocking slowly. The next morning, Miriam was gone. No trace, no note. Only a salt circle left behind in her quarters, broken in one place, as if something had stepped out. Ilara searched the chapel again, and there, behind the altar, freshly placed, was a dinner plate, empty, but warm to the touch. By 1933, the western wing of the Calderon estate had been sealed for over 40 years, nailed shut, bricked over, painted black from the outside. Guests were told it had suffered fire damage, that its wood was rotten, that its stairwell had collapsed in the winter of 1890 and crushed a tutor and 2 maids. But those who worked in the house, those who had listened, knew otherwise. The West Wing wasn't abandoned. It was silenced. The only entrance was a brass-handled door just beyond the library. Ilara found it hidden behind a shelf of false books, hollow spines affixed to a sliding panel. The door had no keyhole, no knob, only a series of 7 vertical slits, like an inverted music box. Someone had gouged words beside them, long faded beneath polish and dust. Her laughter bleeds. Do not answer. The Calderon family ledgers, meticulously kept through centuries, made no mention of the West Wing after 1893. All records of maintenance, lighting, repairs, gone. Even the blueprints, found in a locked safe behind the conservatory, bore a curious omission. A wide blank space labeled simply, "Wing Suspended, by order of the matriarch." But Ilara's discovery came not from blueprints or servant whispers. It came from a child's toy. In the attic, behind broken bird cages and oil portraits with clawed-out eyes, she found a wooden carousel. Its paint had chipped. The horses were headless, but beneath it, tucked into the base, was a child's drawing. A girl standing alone in a long corridor. One wall was covered in mirrors, the other in eyes. At the far end, a black door. Scrawled beneath the image in shaking pencil, she watches through the glass, but she is not in the room. Ilara traced it to a passage in the family's unofficial diary, penned in 1901 by a physician named Dr. Aldrich Ferris. He had been hired to treat a severe emotional episode in a child named Isadora Calderon, a girl for whom no birth certificate existed and whose name had been scrubbed from census records. His notes were clinical at first, detached, but then they turned frantic. Isadora claims there is another girl in the walls. Says she comes out when the mirrors are covered. She pointed to the west wing, then screamed until her jaw dislocated. I've told them the child is delusional, but when I left her room, my reflection did not match my movements. It smiled. I did not. There is something else in this house. It mimics her. Ilara returned to the west wing door at midnight, the only time, according to old notes, when the slits in the door pulsed faintly with warmth. This time, she brought 7 objects: a cracked locket, a child's spoon, a brass music note, a key with no teeth, a strip of mirror, a tooth, and a page torn from the family Bible. Each object, when inserted into the slits in order, triggered a faint mechanical shift. On the final object, the page, the wall breathed, not metaphorically. It exhaled. The door opened. Inside, the west wing had not decayed. It had preserved itself, as if untouched by time. The wallpaper was immaculate. Candles burned without smoke, and down the corridor, mirrors, dozens. But every reflection was delayed, a second too slow, as if the glass remembered, but did not obey. There was no furniture, only children's shoes, pairs, sets, some stacked on top of each other, all perfectly aligned. No dust, no cobwebs, no blood, just shoes, and writing on the walls. Childlike, endless. I was good today. I didn't talk to her. She watches when I eat. If I cover the mirror, she comes closer. I'm not Isadora. I'm not Isadora. I'm not Isadora. In the farthest room, Ilara found a single canopy bed. Beneath it, an iron-bound chest. It contained identical dresses, all black, each with a stitched nameplate reading I, Calderon. Some were blood-stained, but one bore something stranger. 2 nameplates sewn atop one another. Isadora, Imogen, as if the name had been rewritten, or as if 2 children had been reduced to one. A silver hand mirror sat beside the chest. When Ilara picked it up, she saw nothing at first, just her pale face. But then, behind her, a child, not moving, not breathing, standing in the mirror's reflection, but when she turned, no one. The child remained in the mirror. Ilara tried to speak, but the air turned thick, her tongue felt leaden. In the reflection, the child opened her mouth and screamed. The sound never reached Ilara's ears, but the walls cracked. Hairline fractures spidered out across the ceiling. The mirrors began to warp, bulging inward, glass trembling as if it were breathing in. And from behind each reflection, the shape of a girl. Sometimes older, sometimes smaller, but always identical. Too many to count, some of them smiling. Ilara fled the room, retracing her steps. The corridor shortened behind her. Doors disappeared. The light dimmed. Her footsteps no longer echoed. They were matched. Something was walking exactly with her, but not beside her. Inside her. When she reached the brass door, it closed on its own, but she was already through. The door sealed, the slits vanished, and the false bookshelf slid back into place. Behind it, faint laughter, childlike, melodic, decaying. Ilara never spoke of the event again. But that night, in her journal, she wrote a single sentence: "There was never one child." The next morning, the estate's mirrors were covered in veils, by Ilara's own hands. And yet, that evening, as dusk fell across the estate, one veil had been removed, and on its surface, traced in condensation, "She sees you now." The year was 1912, and Calderon Manor stood quieter than usual. By then, 4 generations of the family had vanished beneath its soil. Some buried, some burned, some simply missing. The estate had become a mausoleum with windows where light entered, but warmth did not. And yet one item remained untouched in every inventory log. Always noted, never explained. A painting, 7 feet tall, hung in the east hallway, opposite the grandfather clock that no longer ticked. The records called it the night portrait. But what made it infamous? What chilled even the groundskeepers? Was this: it never existed during the day. The hallway wall was bare in daylight, smooth plaster, no hooks, no nail holes. And yet, every morning at 4 a.m., without fail, a portrait hung there. Same spot, same position, always level, but never painted. Photorealistic. Too perfect. Worse still, it changed each night. One morning, it depicted a woman standing in a field of moths. Another night, it was a boy reaching into a black pool. Another, an elderly man whispering into a severed head, his own held in both hands. The images varied, but one element remained constant. Their eyes followed you, literally, not just an illusion. They tracked movement in real time, even blinking once as a maid dropped a tray and fled screaming. By sunrise, the painting would be gone. The Calderons did not speak of it. They documented it, yes, in private ledgers, passed only to firstborn heirs. In these notes, one theme repeated: "It shows you something you've forgotten. Never look too long. It remembers more than you do." In August of that year, a sleepwalker named Elias Calderon began leaving messages beside the wall. He would pin notes written in his sleep before the portrait appeared. Some read, "Ask her what she did with the jaw." The baby never screamed. That was the other one. He painted over the mouths, "Count them." He claimed no memory of writing them. But under hypnosis, Elias described a recurring dream. A dark room. No floor. Just endless canvas, stretched like skin. And a figure in the distance, painting in silence. "She paints what we forget," he said. "And when the canvas is full, she'll step through." That October, Elias vanished. He had gone to bed at 10:41 p.m., locked his door, window latched, slippers by the bedside. By morning, only the slippers remained. And on the hallway wall, beneath where the painting usually hung, a new inscription: "Do not dream in this direction." The portrait that night. It was Elias, but his mouth had been removed, painted smooth like a doll. His eyes were still moving. Ilara returned to the manor in 1940 after the estate's files were unsealed by state order. She focused on the night portrait's entries, obsessed with the idea that it might hold intergenerational memory, that it had watched everything. She found 3 sketches in the oldest diary, likely from 1829, each labeled "First Iteration." The sketches showed a room of faceless children. One held a brush, another bled from her eyes, and on the wall behind them, a portrait within a portrait, a recursion, painting itself over and over. Ilara set up a camera in the hallway. Timed exposure, infrared sensors, chemically reactive film. No image captured the portrait's formation. The wall simply blinked and the portrait appeared. But one exposure, frame number 77, revealed something unexpected. A single translucent figure leaning through the wall. No face, but unmistakably feminine. In one hand, a wet brush, and in the other, a fragment of human scalp. Terrified but unable to stop, Ilara decided to stare at the portrait the next night for a full hour. She locked herself in. No clocks, no phones, just her notebook. That night, the painting changed 3 times. First, a child's room. Crib, mirror, old nurse. Then a church crypt where someone hammered shut a child's coffin. But the sound looped backward. Finally, a woman, Ilara's great-grandmother, reaching into her own mouth, pulling out a second tongue. Ilara blinked. Suddenly, it was morning. 7 hours lost. She had stood there the entire night, but in her notebook, in her own handwriting, scribbled without memory. She's painting me now. The canvas smells like me. She doesn't know she's dead. Worse still, she began seeing parts of the painting in her dreams. Little pieces. A moth wing in the sink, a severed wrist in the wallpaper, a window nailed shut that didn't exist in the real house, until the next day when she woke and found it. Nailed shut, exactly as she dreamed. She tried to destroy the hallway, hammered the wall, burnt salt, scored the plaster. The portrait returned anyway. That night, it was her again, Ilara, but pregnant. A detail she had never known, a child lost, never born. The figure in the painting stood behind her, one hand resting gently on her belly. Ilara collapsed. After she recovered, she boarded up the hallway. Brick, steel, holy water, priestess, silence. But the portrait still formed, on the back of her eyelids. When she blinked too slowly, when her dreams got long, when her sleep was too deep, and one night it was no longer a painting, it was a door. In the years since, the east hallway has remained sealed, but once in 1966, during renovations, workers broke through the brick. Nothing there, just bare wall. But one of the workers, an apprentice named James Whitlow, returned that night. He asked to stay, said he dreamed about it. They found him the next morning, staring at the empty wall, mouth sewn shut with fishing line. On the plaster, a child's drawing, a woman painting, a body crumpled in front of her. The words beneath, finished. The year was 1887, a year long buried beneath layers of forgotten ledger entries and dusted-off diaries. It was the year when the Calderon family made a choice whispered in the shadows of the manor and carved into the very bones of the estate. Ilara discovered it in a leather-bound volume, hidden inside the crypt beneath the chapel. The book was stained with blood, its pages brittle and faintly warm to the touch, as though still alive. The title, embossed in fading gold, read De Sacrificio et Silentio, of sacrifice and silence. The volume detailed a pact forged under a moonless sky, a covenant with an unnamed entity bound beneath the earth, known only as the Silent Keeper. The family's firstborn were promised life and prosperity, but at a terrible cost. Each firstborn child must be buried at midnight, their deaths sealed in silence. The writing was meticulous, almost reverent, describing rituals carried out in blood and candlelight, with verses chanted in a language long dead. One passage lingered in Ilara's mind. The soil is not earth, but the veil between. The blood binds us to the keeper's breath. We offer our sons and daughters, wrapped not in cloth, but in secrets that the night may never tell. The medallion appeared frequently throughout the tome, an emblem fashioned from blackened silver and etched with cryptic runes, said to be the seal of the pact. One sketch showed the medallion suspended above a black altar, dripping with fresh blood, while the family gathered silently, heads bowed, eyes cast downward, chanting a liturgy of quiet obedience. Ilara wondered where the medallion was now. The oldest townsfolk had vague memories of the medallion's presence during certain ceremonies, though none dared approach the estate during those nights. They spoke of the midnight bells ringing mournfully, and the firstborn's cradle left empty, swaying gently as if rocked by unseen hands. Ilara found an entry from 1887 in the local parish records. A child was buried at midnight, with no mourners and no candles. The family left the chapel silently before dawn, and the church bells tolled once in mourning and once in warning. The volume described the chilling ceremony in agonizing detail. At the stroke of midnight, beneath the chapel's crypt, the family gathers in silence. The firstborn child, swaddled in vine and ash, is laid upon the cold stone altar. The medallion is placed upon the child's chest, and the keeper's breath is summoned through whispered invocation. The candle flames waver, shadows lengthen, and the pact is renewed. The line preserved. Ilara recalled the chapel's cold stone, the dampness beneath her fingers, the way the walls seemed to pulse softly, as if breathing alongside the ritual itself. She remembered the blood stain on the floor, hidden beneath centuries of dust, and the faint scent of iron that lingered in the air. The next discovery came in the form of a journal entry from the family matriarch, Annalisa Calderon, dated just days after the first documented ritual. Her handwriting trembled, the ink smudged with tears. "I have bound us to the keeper to protect what remains of our bloodline. The price is steep, but necessary. Each firstborn's silence is our shield against the darkness beyond the veil. If the pact holds, our name shall endure. If not, all shall fall to the void." Annalise's final words chilled Ilara to her core. "I fear what this silence breeds within our souls. It gnaws at the edges of our minds, whispering truths we dare not hear." The medallion itself was never found, but a fragmented remnant was discovered in the chapel crypt. A broken half, blackened and cold, etched with the faintest trace of the pact's runes. It was said to carry a curse, that any who touched it without the keeper's blessing would be swallowed by silence forever. Ilara's last night in the crypt was marked by a whisper, soft like the rustle of dry leaves. "Speak no names. We are bound." As dawn broke, Ilara left the crypt with the half-medallion wrapped in linen. She knew the pact's grip was far from over, and the silence would not release its hold. The air had grown colder still. In 1948, the Calderon estate was no longer a home. It was a monument to absence. Ilara stood alone in the great hall, where once the laughter of children had bounced from damp walls, now hollow as a grave. The portraits no longer watched. The chandeliers hung empty, their crystals dull as if mourning. Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the trees like a slow, patient hunger. The family had vanished, one by one. No burial records, no public notices, just silence. The graves in the chapel's north yard lay untouched, save for the thin layer of moss and broken twigs. But inside, Ilara found the final piece, a solitary candle, burnt low, resting on the altar of the crypt. Its flame had never died. That candle was the last thread, the last light. She lit it again, though the wick was blackened and brittle. The smoke curled like a whispered prayer, and as the flame flickered, the house seemed to breathe. Walls exhaled shadows, floors sighed beneath her feet, and the silence, the vast, consuming silence, became a voice. Ilara's footsteps echoed through the halls, but no footsteps answered. Instead, something followed her, not behind, not beside, but within. The lineage itself, the echo of blood and soil, was pulling her deeper. She found the chapel doors ajar. Inside, the black altar stood bare, save for the broken medallion, its runes glowing faintly in the candlelight. Ilara reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the cold silver, the flame flickered wildly. Visions surged. Firstborn children buried beneath midnight's cloak. Mothers weeping silently behind locked doors. The keeper, waiting beneath the earth, breathing through roots and stone. The endless procession of names erased from memory, faces lost in fog. The medallion's glow spread. The house walls trembled, and the silence, now a roar, swallowed the chamber. Ilara fell to her knees, and the voices began to speak. Not in words, not in sounds, but in thoughts. The thoughts of the firstborn, the unheard prayers, the quiet screams, the ancient sorrow. The lineage had become a vast, unbroken chorus of silence, a living wound that pulsed beneath the Calderon soil. Ilara understood then. The silence was no absence. It was a presence, a vast, eternal entity, the keeper, sustained by the blood and secrets of every firstborn buried at midnight, a breathless force that devoured memory and identity. Her own breath slowed, her thoughts fragmented, and the candle guttered, a final, fleeting flicker. The last line in her journal was a single word, scrawled beneath trembling handwriting. Home. Outside, the fog pressed closer. The house settled, and the silence grew deeper. The unspoken ending. The Calderon family had vanished into the void they had helped create. The manor, waiting, the soil, restless, and the midnight bell, never still, calling for the next firstborn. You have walked this path with care, with love. Thank you for listening. Before we close, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now breathe deeply and know that some silences never end.